My fellow Sazaitas, you are looking at the map of the troubled eastern region of the DRC, which has never known lasting peace since independence in 1960. This region is called Kivu. It's divided into two provinces, North and South Kivu. It shares the DRC border with Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda. And as I'll clearly demonstrate later, these three countries, Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi, have always been involved in the DRC crisis, one way or the other. They say that when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And indeed, the grass is suffering. Hospitals are overcrowded and overwhelmed with supplies hard to come by. Water, electricity, and means of communication have been disrupted, with thousands fleeing the affected city of Goma, which is now firmly under the control of the M23 rebels. The United Nations says that at least 2,900 people have died in the last 7 days alone. The community of Southern African countries, led by the Zimbabwean president, and the community of East African countries, led by the Kenyan president, have been meeting in Tanzania to discuss this crisis and to try and find a solution. You see, the DRC has a dual membership. It's a member of the Southern African Regional Group, SADC, and also the East African Regional Group, EAC. And these two groups have been separately trying mediation efforts through Angola and Kenya. So what are the issues? Well, the international community accuses Rwanda of aiding and equipping the M23 rebels, but the president of Rwanda denies this. He says that Rwanda's military effort in the eastern region of the DRC is only to stop that crisis from spreading into Rwanda. As we speak, South Africa and Rwanda's diplomatic ties are at an all-time low, with threats and counter-threats of war. And Burundi accuses Rwanda of being on an expansionist agenda. Is Paul Kagame the African version of Vladimir Putin? Is Africa headed towards another regional war? Well, my fellow Sazaitas, slay queens and bingers, socialites, papalites, vasinamalites, varikujigarais, nevasinamarites. Welcome to the special report. Now, by the end of this video, you will fully understand what this M23 rebel group really is, what it stands for, and how it came to be. I will comprehensively explain why and how Rwanda is caught up in this DRC crisis. But to understand this issue, we need to start from the beginning, because the current situation in Eastern DRC is very complex. Much of what we see today are symptoms of a long-standing, deep-rooted issue, one that cannot be explained by merely dealing with the capture of the city of Goma alone. If you want to understand the M23 and the FDLR and all the nitty-gritty of the perennial DRC crisis, then you need to rewind and go back in time. The year is 1884. The country is Germany. The city is Berlin and the head of government is Otto von Bismarck. He is chairing what will become known in history as the Berlin Conference, but initially referred to as the Congo Conference. This is a meeting of European powers. They have gathered in Berlin to establish rules for colonizing Africa. So essentially, the resolutions made at this conference are what gave birth to African borders as we know them today. However, these African borders were created without taking into consideration the existing cultural and ethnic diversities, so that people that belonged to the same tribe and living in the same local area today woke up tomorrow belonging to two different countries. That is the predicament the Tutsi people found themselves in when the border of the DRC and Rwanda was created. You have Tutsis in the eastern side of the DRC and also Tutsis on the other side of the border, that is in Rwanda. these people were once one nation without borders, but they just woke up one day living in different countries because of the border drawn by Belgium and Germany. The DRC belonged to Belgium and Rwanda belonged to Germany. Initially, the DRC actually did not belong to the Belgian state. You see, by the time the Berlin Conference was held, the King of Belgium, King Leopold, through his agents, had already explored the DRC and signed various treaties with local tribes. He now considered the DRC his own personal property. So, when the Berlin Conference was held, he made sure that his position prevailed. Consequently, the Berlin Conference recognized King Leopold's claim of ownership over the land we call DRC today. He named it the Congo Free State, even though the Congolese people were never actually free under his rule. And so, the Congo Free State became his personal property. It was the world's only private colony, and under his administration, millions of Congolese people died. King Leopold then surrendered the administration of the Congo Free State to the Belgian government in 1908. It was renamed Belgian Congo. From then onwards, it was no longer a personal property of King Leopold. It became a colony of Belgium, and the Belgian government established a colonial government that would be in power for the next 52 years. But the Germans did not pursue a policy of direct rule when they occupied Rwanda and Burundi. They gave the local Tutsi ruling class some level of autonomy and escalated ethnic divisions that had existed between the Tutsi and the Hutu. At this point, it is prudent for me to explain the ethnic composition of Rwanda for the sake of context. You see, Rwanda has three main tribes: the Hutu, the Tutsi, and the Twa. The Hutu are the majority, accounting for more than 3/4 of the total population. The Tutsi are around 14% and the Twa 1%. When the Tutsi arrived in Rwanda, they gradually became dominant, later establishing a kingdom. By the time the Germans occupied Rwanda, the Tutsi had risen to become the most powerful tribe in much of what we call Rwanda today. It's almost like what happened in Zimbabwe before colonization, when the minority Ndebele dominated the Shona, who were and still are the majority. The only difference is, unlike the Germans in Rwanda, the British did not pursue a policy of indirect rule in Zimbabwe. The British sought a total takeover of the land we call Zimbabwe today. And when the Ndebele resisted in 1893, they were crushed. This marked the end of their dominance and the gradual rise of the Shona, which culminated in them taking power at independence in 1980, with Robert Mugabe becoming prime minister. The Shona have dominated national politics in Zimbabwe to this day. But in Rwanda, things were different. The colonizer, Germany, worked with the local nobility, the Tutsi ruling class, to advance a colonial agenda. Now, I'm sure you can imagine the amount of resentment and anger felt by the Hutu, who obviously hated the idea of being dominated by a minority tribe, and more so, a minority tribe that colluded with the imperialist Germany and later on Belgium after the defeat of Germany in the First World War. Yeah, that's right. After the defeat of Germany, Rwanda and Burundi as one country were handed over to Belgium under the League of Nations. So because of the resentment, some Hutus began to demand for equality, and over time, the call for equality transformed into calls for majority rule. The Hutu were no longer calling for equality with the Tutsi. They now wanted to be in charge themselves, which meant independence from Belgium and the establishment of a Hutu government. What followed was a violent revolution which saw the killing of over 20,000 Tutsis by the Hutu. The end result was the removal of the Tutsi monarchy. Tens of thousands of Tutsis fled to neighboring countries, including Uganda. The Hutu had taken over the reins of power, marking an end to the Tutsi dominance. Rwanda's independence was then granted in 1962. But 2 years before that, the Democratic Republic of Congo had gained its independence from Belgium in 1960 with Patrice Lumumba as prime minister. He would, however, be in power for only 2 months and 11 days. He was removed from power by this guy, Joseph Desire Mobutu, popularly known as Mobutu Sese Seko. Mobutu's coup d'etat was backed by Belgium and America. Western powers generally hated Lumumba's Pan-African stance. They especially feared that he would turn the DRC into a communist state. This was during the Cold War era, when America was prepared to do anything necessary to stop the spread of communism. To this end, America was prepared to tolerate and work with dictators from around the world for as long as those dictators were against communism. Mobutu was one such dictator who was tolerated by the Americans because he was anti-communist. This exposes the double standards of America. On one side, they preach the gospel of democracy and the rule of law, yet they are prepared to flush that gospel down the toilet when it comes to protecting their interests and advancing their foreign policy. So, Lumumba became a victim of Cold War politics and the racist colonial hangover of the Belgians, plus the continued desire by Western powers to plunder Congolese resources, which they all knew would be impossible to plunder under the administration of the Pan-Africanist Lumumba. It is not a coincidence that the DRC has been in perpetual conflict since independence, particularly the mineral-rich province of Kivu, which is endowed with minerals like diamonds, tin, coltan, which is used in the production of electronic devices, tungsten, which you find in light bulbs, and tourmaline, which is used in the production of pressure sensors and jewelry. It's part of the reason why there are over 100 rebel groups in the DRC at any given time. You can't deny the presence of a non-African foreign hand in this crisis. But this foreign hand did not begin today. This foreign hand started with colonization. The seed for this crisis was sown at colonization and then germinated at independence with the assassination of Prime Minister Lumumba and the installation of the dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, who gradually took charge of the whole country and renamed it Zaire. And as they say, the rest is history. But fortunately, I'm here to narrate the entire history and put it in context. Meanwhile, the organized violence against Tutsis in Rwanda continued after independence in 1962. Over 100,000 Tutsis would flee Rwanda, many of them going to Uganda. While in exile, the Rwandan refugees formed an organization that came to be known as the Rwandan Alliance for National Unity. Its goals were the return of Tutsi refugees to Rwanda and taking over government. The current president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, is one of the Tutsi refugees who fled to Uganda. He did so with his family. He was only 2 years old at the time. Kagame spent his entire childhood in Ugandan refugee camps. He, together with many Rwandan refugees, joined Yoweri Museveni's National Resistance Army, which waged a guerrilla war against President Milton Obote's regime. The resistance eventually prevailed, and on January 26, 1986, Yoweri Museveni declared himself a president of Uganda. Paul Kagame was subsequently promoted to the position of a chief of military intelligence. He, together with many of his Rwandan counterparts, had gained experience in guerrilla warfare in Museveni's army. They decided to use that experience in planning their own revolution against the Hutu-dominated government in Rwanda. And so, in 1987, the Rwandan Alliance for National Unity, which had been formed in 1979 to fight for the cause of Rwandan Tutsis, was reorganized as the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF. It launched its liberation struggle in 1990, operating from its base in Uganda and with the support of President Museveni. This marked the beginning of the Rwandan Civil War. In 1994, the Rwandan president at the time was assassinated. His jet was shot down. The president of Burundi also perished in the attack, and hours after the incident, one of the most notorious modern genocides began. You see, in a space of just 100 days, close to 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus were massacred in a genocide that beggars belief. It was the kind of stuff you only see in the most horrific of horror movies. The premeditated, well-calculated, state-sanctioned and sponsored massacre of about 800,000 people. How deranged can human beings become? The killings only stopped when the RPF, which by now was led by Paul Kagame and with the assistance of President Museveni's army, finally took control of Rwanda after years of fighting. After the genocide, hundreds of thousands of Hutus, including many of the genocidal killers, fled to the DRC to escape prosecution and persecution by the new Tutsi-dominated Rwandan Patriotic Front, which had come to power. I should emphasize that by this time, the DRC was known as Zaire and its president was Mobutu Sese Seko. So Mobutu welcomed these Hutu extremists as his personal guests and allowed them to establish military and political bases in the eastern region of Zaire, which I talked about in my intro, the Kivu region. This is what initially started the mess in the eastern region of Congo that we are witnessing today. Because you see, the Hutu extremists that fled Rwanda started attacking and killing Tutsis across the Rwandan border and in Zaire itself. Remember that the eastern region of Zaire has always been home to many Tutsis. The colonial border, which was drawn by Europeans after the Berlin Conference, split the Tutsi nation, so that you now had Congolese Tutsis and Rwandan Tutsis. This was the making of Europeans, not Africans. So when Mobutu allowed the Hutu extremists to set up military bases in the eastern region of Congo, these Hutu extremists started attacking and killing Congolese Tutsis and occasionally crossing the border to kill Rwandan Tutsis. The government of Rwanda saw this as a violation of Rwandan territorial integrity, and so it began arming the Tutsi people on the Congo side of the border in the eastern region of Kivu so they could defend themselves against the Hutu extremists. And as you can imagine, this angered Mobutu, but his army didn't have the capacity to defend the borders of Zaire, plus he no longer had the political clout as to attract international support. Mobutu started calling for all Tutsis in his country to leave, claiming they are from Rwanda. This put him at loggerheads with not only the Tutsis in Zaire but also the new administration in Rwanda. In response, the Tutsis in the eastern region of Zaire joined a new resistance which was led by this guy, Laurent Kabila. The Kabila-led resistance, whose soldiers were mainly Tutsi, was supported by Rwanda, Uganda, Angola, and Burundi. They toppled Mobutu's government and replaced him with Laurent Kabila. So Kabila then renamed Zaire to the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. But just over a year after taking over, Kabila turned against his allies who had helped him seize power. You see, what happened is that after Kabila took over, the Rwandan security forces remained in the DRC to help maintain peace and security. However, Kabila's critics began to question the presence of Rwanda in the DRC. There was a generally held view that Rwanda had been responsible for winning the war against Mobutu and placing Kabila in power, a view which greatly annoyed Kabila. And so, he started removing Tutsis from his government and took measures to weaken Rwanda's military presence in the eastern region of DRC, the Kivu region. He ordered all foreign troops out of the Congo and allowed Hutu armed groups to reorganize at the border with Rwanda once again. In 1998, the Tutsis in the eastern region of the DRC, in the city of Goma, started a rebellion. Rwanda offered them immediate assistance, and in early August, a well-armed rebel group called the Rally for Congolese Democracy emerged. Primarily, this rebel group was composed of Tutsis and was backed by Rwanda and Uganda. It quickly gained dominance over the resource-rich eastern provinces of the DRC and based its operations in Goma. The end result was a full-scale invasion of the DRC by Rwanda, Uganda, and Burundi, backing the Tutsi-aligned militia inside the DRC. Running out of options, Kabila then sought the help of rebel militias within his country to help in quelling the rebellion in Goma. In addition, he called for outside support, firstly from SADC and then all African countries in general. Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Angola responded to his appeal by sending troops. Other African countries later followed suit. Libya, Chad, and Sudan either sent troops or made financial contributions to the war effort. This was the beginning of Africa's bloodiest war in history, dubbed the Great War of Africa, or sometimes referred to as Africa's World War. The Zimbabwean armed forces were deployed in the DRC in August 1998. They, together with other countries fighting in Kabila's corner, were instrumental in saving his regime. And keep in mind, in this war, Kabila also had the support of the Hutu rebels, who by the year 2000 were operating under the name FDLR, which stands for Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda. This rebel group is made up of Hutu extremists who fled Rwanda after participating in the killing of Tutsis during the Rwandan genocide. In the midst of the war chaos, Laurent Kabila was assassinated in a failed coup attempt and was replaced by his son, Joseph Kabila, under whose administration the war finally came to a close through the mediation effort of South Africa. So in the end, the loser of this war was the DRC and its people. Millions of innocent lives perished, not to mention the looting of Congolese minerals by foreign actors. The Congo Wars achieved nothing but the death of millions of innocent civilians, yet the men who were directing these wars were busy pillaging and plundering Congolese resources. They watched their men die in a pointless war as they relaxed in the comfort of their impenetrable mansions. Even though a peace deal was reached and a ceasefire signed, rebel activities in the DRC did not stop. Actually, in 2006, a new rebel group called the CNDP, meaning National Congress for the Defense of the People, was formed and continued causing problems in the years that followed. But on March 23, 2009, the CNDP signed a new peace deal with the Kabila government, Joseph Kabila, in which it agreed to become a political party in exchange for the release of its imprisoned members. However, 3 years later, the CNDP pulled out of the 2009 peace agreement and reorganized itself as the M23 movement. The name M23 is short for March 23, which is the date the 2009 peace deal was signed. So that's where the name M23 movement comes from. This rebel movement accuses the DRC government of not living up to the 2009 peace deal. It is especially annoyed by the fact that the DRC government did not fully integrate Tutsi Congolese into the army and government. The M23 movement also vows to defend Tutsi interests, particularly against the FDLR, which was founded by Hutus who fled Rwanda after participating in the 1994 genocide. So, if you look at it, nothing has changed in the DRC despite 2 regional wars and countless mediation efforts. The crisis is by and large how and where it was 2 decades ago when the DRC was still under Mobutu. We still have the Hutu militias, largely under the FDLR, and the Tutsi militias, largely under the M23. Exactly the way it was when the first Congo War erupted in 1996. The only thing that has changed are the names of the rebel movements and names of those in charge of the regime in DRC. Consider the following. The first and only black prime minister of the DRC, Lumumba, was removed via a coup and then assassinated. The first president of the DRC, Kasavubu, was removed via a coup. The second president of the DRC, Mobutu, was removed via a foreign-backed armed rebellion. The third president of the DRC, Kabila, was assassinated. He was replaced by his son, Joseph Kabila. To this day, Joseph Kabila remains the only long-serving DRC president not to have been removed by a coup, an assassination, or an armed rebellion. He was replaced in 2019 by the current president, Tshisekedi. Yet, the problems of the past still haunt the DRC. What must happen now? The thing is, even if you negotiate a peace deal with the M23, what do you do with the various other rebel groups operating inside the DRC? Research has shown that at any given time, there are at least 100 different rebel groups inside the DRC, some of which are foreign sponsored. It makes it extremely difficult to find a formula for achieving lasting peace. This crisis needs a careful, steady, but robust handling. It needs cool heads. It needs a lot of compromise from the warring parties, but above all, it needs a purely African solution under African processes, run by African leaders who have Africa at heart. But whatever happens, I'll be here to marinate you with all the details without fear or favor, because on this platform, we say it as it is. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share. Andingo wereketa